Pete Rizzo was in the room when Bitcoin changed the world. We're going to hear more about that. And you, of course, know him for his prolific writing and posts documenting 17 years of Bitcoin history, day by day, week by week, connecting the dots between Bitcoin's past, present, and future. Uh, his news feed is often on X, where I go to find out about breaking news, even just this morning, what's happening in Bitcoin and beyond in our world. He's got a newsletter, the Bitcoin History newsletter. You can subscribe to that. Make sure you don't miss anything. He's one of the longest serving journalists in Bitcoin, with a career spanning over a decade of covering this space at high levels, low levels, every little detail, living through its pivotal moments. And he has the archives to prove it. Founding editor at CoinDesk, managing editor at Bitcoin Magazine. He's the president of BitcoinTreasuries.net. And he hosts the Bitcoin Historian podcast, which is attracting a lot of amazing guests. Looking forward to see what comes in the future on that and everywhere else. Pete, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here. Always a good day, to be watching Bitcoin out there in the world, right?
It's always a good day in Bitcoin, whether it's, I've come to the point in my Bitcoin place in life where whether it's FUD, whether it's political speculations, treasuries, BIP 110, I enjoy the popcorn. I'm here for it. I've ridden it up and down. I am actually kind of looking forward to a future that I think is not just extremely interesting, but I'm crazy bullish. There's signals that we're at like running out of runway on kind of the oversold situation here. The money printer is going to go. I guess before I jump into, I want to focus on your podcast and what you're doing there. But just today, let's just say, bringing up to stage here, your feed, news happening right now. Clarity Act.
Clarity Act. Yeah, it's the talk of the town. Whether or not we will get this bill passed, which of course everybody wants, right?
Yeah. Well, it would provide for a lot of the big boys, of course, clarity and the regulatory, framework for a lot of things, break open, break loose, things that cause players to see it as like an on-risk asset, if you will. I think it could shift away from being that on-risk asset and just being done with what are we doing here. So, just today I was catching up on the fact that there seems to be a decent chance that it's going to drop. It's going to get voted on. It may get ink. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, my latest newsletter all about this, and I've been talking with folks in Washington and obviously following on the feed. Well, I mean, the big news this morning is that the Republicans, at least Senator Thune's coming out and saying that he intends to get the bill to the vote. So maybe to back up, right, people who aren't familiar with kind of the inner workings of Congress, haven't looked at it for a long time. Generally, we don't really see there's a certain kind of vote commitment, right? So there's a lot of politics and theater. We talk a lot about in Bitcoin about the problems with democratic governments and governance. And of course, you get a certain amount of political theater, right? And so unfortunately, I do think we're getting a lot of political theater over clarity right now. And, one of those items is essentially, this bill needs a certain amount of support to even come to the floor. There's calendar restrictions in terms of how much time they have. There's different priorities. And essentially, you can kind of think about it as the midterms are coming in mid-August. The midterms are coming up in November. The August recess is coming in mid-August. And after August recess, basically everyone goes into campaign mode. So this is sort of the last window of opportunity for both parties to sort of set their agenda for how they're running against each other in the midterms. So there's a lot of baggage here, right? What does that mean for clarity? It means a couple things, right? It means that now the lens of clarity isn't both parties, participating to get some form of law that is in our best interest as citizens passed as quickly as possible. It means, unfortunately, that they are wondering, is this good for their constituency? Is it good for their donors? And what message does this send to the general public ahead of the midterm elections? And so all this is to say, we know that the bill requires a certain amount of Democratic support. It needs probably about somewhere between 8 and 10 U.S. senators from the Democratic Party to sort of break ranks and crossover. We know that there's a few Republicans who are demurring from the bill for different reasons. And so there's kind of this key question right now is, will they get a 60 vote commitment? If so, it'll come to the floor. And if it comes to the floor, will Democrats vote for it? And, I think there's a bit of posturing. I can give you how I would expect it to play out. I can talk about different scenarios, but I do think it's important to kind of keep that lens where a lot of what you're seeing right now is theater, right? The party are going to, I think, do some things for a specific emphasis. My belief is the Republicans need to get this bill to the floor, right? The Republicans were sort of voted into office with a clear crypto mandate. I think that the Democrats have a lot of incentive for this bill to neither come to a vote or pass. There's some reasons for that, but it's pretty clear that the sort of far left elements of the Democratic Party are anti the industry at this point, and that messaging is really resonating with the Democratic base. And so that's sort of the stage. Happy to get into any more specifics you might have.
My sense of it is that there's so much wealth and money on Bitcoin now. In a way, you can't back that train up. And so even people on the left who, to their constituents, are managing everything from communism and socialism to like speaking for the people. And yet they kind of, for the sake of the economy or moving forward on things, I think they really could very well just vote for it and then try to explain it in other ways or frame it. Or
I don't think I really, so that's the one where I really disagree with this. I think that I think that crypto, I think if I'm the Democratic Party, you think about the game theory, there's two scenarios, right? And I'll give you one scenario and I'll give you the positive scenario and the negative scenario. The positive scenario is basically, they're afraid of the crypto lobby, right? There's so much money in sort of, and I say crypto pejorative, of course, because we know there's a lot of non sort of Bitcoin elements in there. So they're afraid of all the money in these political action committees that is donating on behalf of the crypto industry. And so the sort of case for why they would vote, and again, so this sort of gets to like, can the bill get to the floor? I think the Democrats have a lot of incentive for the bill never to come to the floor. But if it comes to the floor, the kind of positive scenario is the Democratic Party basically backs the bill because they don't want that big pool of money. Again, if people forget like how large the crypto political lobby is, it is now as large and spent more in the last election than the oil lobby. Right? So the crypto lobby is one of the largest spending on a dollar spending basis. Well, again, it's a new industry. It wants a lot of things, right? A lot of the incumbent industries, don't have sort of the same, it's like the manufacturing industries are not, or like the, aviation industry is not spending as much money lobbying. It's like it's a very entrenched industry. And so crypto is now sort of like one of the top three, if not the number one spender on sort of just political campaigning. And so, the positive scenario is sort of the bill gets to a vote, right? So there's enough support. They kind of clear the sub amendments. The Republicans sort of do enough to convince the Democrats to get the vote, and it passes largely, I think, out of fear of what will happen if the Democrats don't vote for it, right? And so that's sort of the positive scenario. But I think there's two more likely scenarios, and I'll get into one. I think the first more likely one is that the Democrats just sort of keep coming up with excuses for the bill not to come to the floor, right? Because I think it's pretty clear some elements of the party don't like it. And it's pretty clear that the party doesn't have a lot to show for being hard on Trump, right? And so like really in the midterms, the Democrats want to run as like, we held Trump accountable. We are doing the work, on your behalf to stop Trump corruption, right? Like that's really what they want their headline to be. Right. And so for them voting for the crypto bill that basically, now that we know that he's made $1 billion off the industry, looks really bad to the base, right? I'll just, full disclosure, I'm from Massachusetts. I'm a New England, born and bred. That's a very bad, that audience does not want to hear that message.
Yeah.
And so if you come from that standpoint, the best scenario for the Democrats is that it never comes to a vote. They don't have to openly oppose the industry. They can keep telling the industry, oh, we would have supported this if it came to a vote, but golly gee, we couldn't get it to a vote. So, we would have loved to vote on it, but by the way, like half of our audience hates you guys and that we're going to kill this bill, right? So like they have this sweet spot. Well, like the sweet spot for the Democrats is they never have to vote no, but they kind of quietly kill the bill, and yet they don't get openly scapegoated, and like the crypto money doesn't attack them. And so I think what the
Absolutely.
Republicans are trying to do now is basically force a vote and basically force the Democrats to openly oppose the bill and vote against it. And so I think that they will. And I've said this for a while, is I think crypto is like a real sweet spot for the Democratic Party. And again, it's like, I'm not saying I like this. A lot of when people cut up my clips and stuff, I'm not saying like this is something that like makes me happy. I'm just saying that the American left is in ideological tatters. It does not have a clear forward direction the same way the Republican Party does under Trump. You could argue, though, obviously that coalition is breaking down. But the American left has a lot of rebuilding from what was done under Kamala, and there was a lot of negative things under the Biden administration. Has a lot of rebuilding, and so they're looking ahead to 2028. And so, with 2028 in mind, the party sort of needs an issue to like coalesce around and gain strength. And so I've started talking about this like maybe about a year ago, but I said, I think crypto makes a lot of sense because if you look about the issues that really unite the core Democratic base, and again, I'm not saying that I enjoy these things. They're just empirically they're true. The Democratic base does not like billionaires. They're unhappy about wealth inequality. They have a lot of ideas about how to solve wealth equality that are controversial, but like, let's just admit they're unhappy about wealth equality. They really are unhappy with Silicon Valley from defecting from their party and going over to the Republican Party. This is what happened with Elon. Why do they hate Elon so much? Because he defected from the blue tech coalition, which was sort of captured by the Democratic Party since the 90s. Really, tech has been a part of the constituency for the Democrats, and they're really upset that Elon broke that and that tech moved over there. So they're unhappy with tech bills. They're unhappy with money. They're unhappy with tech, and they really don't like that Trump is, he's a businessman and he's brazen. And so crypto, let's check the boxes. Ding, ding, ding. Like fastball down the middle. So if you are going to be the Democratic Party, and if I was advising the Democratic Party and they were like, okay, like how do we get our shit together? I would be like, yeah, absolutely. You have no incentive to vote for this bill. You have every incentive to block it and then run very negatively against it because your base will be galvanized by that. Again, I think that base needs a lot of education, and I don't think the base should hold those opinions. But it's pretty clear that this is how politics functions, right? It's to give the people what they want. And there's a lot of incentive for the Democrats to block this bill specifically, but also rebuild their sort of identity around this. I think that like that would probably be unsuccessful in 2028, right? Like I think but they don't have anybody leading them to sort of a broader message, right? And so I think it's like very easy for them to sort of be like, okay, like let's just nuke this crypto thing and then just like run really hard against it. You can already tell, because again, the way these party complexes work, right, is that they test messaging, right? Like one of the ways that like even Bitcoin and crypto sort of got into the Republican vortex, people don't remember this, but the first sort of message sent by the Republican Party was that they were anti-CBDCs, right? All the way back to 2024 with Vivek Ramaswamy, right? Vivek Ramaswamy was kind of the first one, and he came out and said, hey, Republicans, you don't want a CBDC. And this was sort of a message that like was formed with the crypto, some people in the crypto industry of sort of like, how do we get the Republicans to be friendly to Bitcoin and crypto? Well, let's talk about big government money and sort of get them against big government money, and then we'll sort of breadcrumb to Bitcoin and crypto, right? So we know that like messaging in parties is usually sanctioned, right? Like somebody tries some messaging out and the messaging is successful, and then it sort of gets adopted by the party. And so what's happening on the left right now with like Warren and Bernie Sanders, and again, these are really like two of the highest profile people like in the party right now, is that they are actively sending mailers, so they're actually mailing people stuff about how the crypto industry is bad. And they're publicly tweeting about how the industry is bad and corrupt, right? And so that's a pretty strong signal that like the party really doesn't want to embrace this stuff. And yeah, this was always my, because I was part of some of the earlier discussions of the people who eventually kind of went and, did the whole sort of like Republican Party Bitcoin crypto union. And the sort of the problem with this is like, if you make Bitcoin a partisan issue, you're going to end up with partisan problems. And so the partisan problem that we have right now is essentially, sure, there are some Democrats who support the industry, and I think there's a lot of reasons for Democrats to support the industry, and I've written a lot about like reasons the Democrats should support the industry, but they haven't had that education, and they're not. And I think the worrisome part is like they need to form some identity. And if you're going to kind of like draw a line against Trump, it seems pretty obvious that like him making $1 billion off of a coin that like he named after himself, like is a pretty easy place to draw the line. You're like, okay, like if he can get away with that, it's sort of like, well, he can get away with anything. And it's relatively easy to explain. Like, I don't like his meme coin. I'm sure, I don't know your opinions, but I'm sure most Bitcoiners don't like his meme or Melania's meme coin, right? So
right.
It's pretty easy to just draw this line and say,
yeah,
like that's kind of like most reasonable people, like even people in the industry are like, okay, like, yeah, that was bad and corrupt and like shouldn't have happened. And so it's just such a layup for them. It's a fastball, like down the middle. And I think they're going to crank it. I mean, why not? Like, what do they have to lose? They like literally like Trump was so popular. And they haven't really, derailed his agenda in any way, right? Like they haven't like really made a stand against anything that he's wanted. In fact, they've like passed a ton of his legislation, like the Genius Act is law. Maybe you could argue with the Iran stuff that they've started to kind of step up and like give him some friction, but like they really haven't like drawn the line. And so I think like if you're the Democrats, like, yeah, voting against clarity is like a real, like, why not? Like, what do you got? Like, the reason why not though is like you get pummeled by the crypto lobby. But again, I think here the math is sort of weird, right? Because I don't know how many real single issue Bitcoin crypto voters there are. This has sort of been one of the myths. Like this was sort of one of the things that was sold to Donald Trump, is that there was a real big voting block for Bitcoin and crypto. And look, I'm a Bitcoin and crypto voter, and I would say that's a key issue for me. But I don't know. I think that the size of that group was vastly overstated in order to kind of get Trump into the crypto tent. And I think that if the Democrats call bluff on that, how many voters are they really going to lose versus the ones that they'll gain because, they finally, like, they've got to kill something. It's like they've got to take out something from his, this is just game theory. You're playing Battleship, you sink somebody else's battleship. It's like, if they're playing Battleship against Trump, it's like he's taken out like 4 of their ships. Like you got to take out something at some point. And so crypto is just, why not?
Maybe it's the easy one. Maybe it's that easy topic they can, okay, if the left needs unification around an issue or issues, you can easily just say, well, we're against Trump. Well, everything though. And so what is your platform exactly? Okay, well, maybe it's big wealth.
Big wealth.
We're for
crypto's
wealth
out of control.
transfer. So economically, sort of that more and more visible elephant in the room is really the economy. Like, what about the
and then he's making $1 billion off of crypto while you're paying $7 for gas, right? It's a real
right.
It's like a real
maybe
easy,
maybe this crypto stuff, the clarity bill, maybe connected with AI, maybe these are things they can be against with another plan that they'll say has got to be something different about, like, whatever, taxation or printing more money. But
well, the AI stuff gets interesting because you get into like, okay, well, they stole intellectual property, and so there's an argument to like nationalize the AI companies. That's like from a left perspective. And so I mean, look, I just think I'm calling balls and strikes here. I just think that it's hard to be optimistic about clarity right now because I think there's so much game theoretic incentive for the Democrats to really make a stand here. I think the one thing that would really stop them is this idea of the wall of money on the Bitcoin crypto side. But I still think if you're the Democrats, I think you take that chance. Like if you're going to take a risk, it's like a real calculated risk. It's like, okay, like, well, if we kill this bill and then a bunch of money opens up against us in the midterms, that money is only useful if it actually activates voters. And, crypto voters, it's like they're down 50% from all-time highs. Like, you're going to go to the poll, you're going to feel good. I'm going to do that. I'm not belittling it, right? I'm making a point facetiously, which is like, okay, it's kind of a good time. Like if you're going to do this, and then you can pass like a more structured Clarity Act later and sort of claim to your audience that like, oh, like, we made it really much stronger and it's a better bill because we passed it. And so, maybe it gets passed in the spring or, sometime next year. And then the Democrats sort of claim it as like a victory because I think they want to win back. If you're the Democrats, like you want to win back tech, right? The loss of really like the big story from 2024 is like the loss of tech from the Democratic Party and the gaining of tech through crypto and AI. That's really what happened. And so there's this football kind of play here right now where the Republicans have the ball, they want to keep the ball, and if you're the Democrats, you want to smack, you want to poke that ball out.
Yeah, if there's anything positive going on, it's that there's a lot of attention on it. There's interest and pressure to at least discuss if they're pushing back on, say, the ethics provision, and they want to talk about that, have a counteroffer. And
well, but if you're the Democrats, like there's no limit on the concerns that you can have, right? And so if you know there's only 17 days, I think what you do if you're the Democrats is you just, if you don't want to actually vote against it, you're just like, oh, like actually I don't like this, and I don't like that, and like you just kind of run this like distraction scheme, right? Like where you come up with like 5 or 6 things that you don't like, and then you just kind of run them on a loop. And then and I think this is what they're doing, right? They, first it was the ethics provision, now they have an ethics provision, but they don't like the ethics provision. Now it's like the law enforcement groups are coming out against the BRCA, which is like the portion that really is probably the most relevant for Bitcoin. Corey Klippenston was on my podcast recently, and I agree with him. It's like probably the only useful part for Bitcoin. It just protects open source developers, so they don't like that. And so you sort of go down the list, and so there's a bunch of holes to poke, right? So I think the likely middle scenario is it just never gets voted on. And then the Democrats kind of can walk away and not get attacked, but then they sort of killed it. And then really it's like, okay, well, if you're the Republicans, do you go all in on forcing the vote? And if they force the vote, if you're the Democrats, what do you do? I think, if it was, again, this is just game theory. I think there's a lot of incentive to suggest that, like, if you're going to bet on one thing, you probably like, this is probably a pretty good one.
I guess I can see that, they may just kind of have their issues and drag their feet, and it doesn't pass, and they can have that as part of their platform, and it resonates with constituents, a lot of which don't understand Bitcoin or don't like big wealth or want some other solution, steal from other people.
Well, and I think it was compounded. I think there was hope that the Democratic Party would embrace like a more positive, Bitcoin message. But I think with like Mondami and like folks like who are obviously kind of ascendant in the party, like being more of the post-Bernie socialism kind of stuff, I really think that is going to be problematic. So, I mean, I've been watching the Democratic Party for, my whole life at this point, but at this point, it doesn't seem like there's the party's been going farther and farther left. Right. And at this point, like there isn't anything else in the party to suggest that there's like a center message that they can make right now. So, you might as well play to the base and you play to your big dogs. And I think that's why you see Bernie coming out. Does Bernie really, I can't imagine that Bernie Sanders has ever sent a Bitcoin transaction or really knows that much about it. It would shock me if that was inaccurate. That's why I think you're seeing these people come out and really kind of hammer this home. But I mean, look, this is the end result of the industry trying to play party politics. The good news is that Bitcoin doesn't care. Like there's probably very little in this bill that impacts the average Bitcoin hodler in any real meaningful way. I think there's some things that are interesting for developers, that would help kind of open source Bitcoin projects for sure that are interesting. But other than that, the people who are going to benefit this are mostly the banks, and it's mostly the crypto sort of lobbying group that really wants regulatory clarity for tokens and ICOs and kind of different exotic kind of crypto stuff, right? Like that's really where this bill kind of has the most meat. Maybe you'll see more banks come out and offer Bitcoin, and just as part of their offering as well. I think there will be some banking adoption. I would probably expect that, the treasury companies, the Bitcoin companies will probably benefit from that. They'll have an easier time getting relationships, but for the average Bitcoin user, hard to really say what you're gonna notice a big difference. I think if this bill doesn't pass.
Yeah, it gets also to the work you're doing in Bitcoin Treasuries, bitcointreasuries.net. Before we get there on game theory, real quick, I'll bring to stage here this concept. You've probably seen this before, but you've talked a lot recently about the second age of Bitcoin, and I've heard from different Bitcoiners over the years, recent year, kind of like, where are we here? I've heard people say, oh, the chasm has just not even begun, or we're kind of in
No,
the
yeah,
chasm.
yeah. I
It's
think
easy to
we're,
feel.
yeah.
Where
This
do
is a
you think
great part. Yeah.
is this accurate, and where do you think we're really at if you zoom out?
Yeah, I think we're in the early majority. We're in that big fat yellow, and I would actually say the chasm was Trump, like the actual, integration of the Bitcoin and crypto. So the second age of Bitcoin is something I've been talking about a lot recently, which is really just compiles my thoughts in that. Yeah, I mean, at the point that the largest global power and the global power structure is actively using your technology to further its own interests, you sort of have to accept that you've reached a level of saturation that's probably meaningful. I do think it's early, right? I think like we're in the early majority. We haven't crossed over into the conservative part of it. But I think with the specific election of Donald Trump in 2024, the industry has sort of passed out of its first kind of maturation phase where it was like a very nerdy, fringe internet type technology to something where, yeah, now you're sort of, this technology is going to happen. It is going to be widely integrated into society. And now it's just a question of how it happens and who benefits from it, not a question of if it will happen. And so I think with Trump's election, a lot of this compiles my feelings. And I think as I see a lot of kind of older folks in the industry kind of leave, right, the early tech people who are kind of before the chasm, they seem like they're, going way. I just interviewed Jed McCaleb, who was like a super early Bitcoiner on my podcast. He founded Mt. Gox, was mining when it was like 10 cents, ran basically the whole economy on his laptop. And, he's building space centers, right? He wants people to live in space. And so his company is building like space habitats. And, he's just, wow, a billionaire now who just can do eccentric things like, build space habitats. And so, and, he wants to live in space. And so, yeah, I think we're definitely in the early majority. I think that's why a lot of the old cypherpunk energy is kind of leaving the space. They don't feel like it's the same vibes anymore. So, you see like somebody like a Simon Dixon who, I would have grown up going to conferences with him. I understand why he's, more negative towards the industry these days. And with Bitcoin treasuries, I think a lot of my thesis, I've built a number of media products in the space. The first was CoinDesk, which was very much that emerging technology story, right? CoinDesk was TechCrunch for Bitcoin, right? It was for Silicon Valley folks who were trying to learn about Bitcoin. It was for investors. The whole mental model of the space at that time was, Facebook had happened, went to 8 billion users. Uber had happened, went to 1 billion users. Bitcoin was going to be the next big hockey stick. That's how the industry thought of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Then, Bitcoin Magazine was really the counterculture era, right? Grassroots kind of revolution culture, Bitcoin scaling through, peer-to-peer adoption. I think Bitcoin treasury is like why I've spent so much time with it, why we're doing the conference in September, why the platform is really growing. Like if people are looking at the YouTube channels and the Twitter accounts, I mean, Bitcoin treasuries at this point is larger than some of the crypto publications like Blockworks and, is growing even during a bear market. And, what's the thesis of Bitcoin treasuries? It's really just an institutional only Bitcoin media site. So you'll see on there, we have Matt Cole interview this week, Dylan LeClaire, BlackRock last week. It's really, presenting the Bitcoin story to institutions through a media outlet that is, I'll say it, it's for the orange ties. It's for the people who want to go to Wall Street and want to do business with Wall Street and want to further Bitcoin's interests amongst that demographic. My view, and it's unpopular, I was chatting with Danny Knowles the other day. We did a podcast called Is the Bitcoin Culture Dead? I don't think the Bitcoin culture will ever die, right? Bitcoin has a thriving culture, but I do think that the Bitcoin culture is going to change again. It's going to adopt to this early majority mindset. And the way that Bitcoin is going to go from 100,000 to $1 million a coin is that Wall Street will lead that transition. And a lot of what we're kind of talking about and seeing right now with Clarity and other things is, I think if you got in early and you've been stacking Bitcoin and you've been making use of these tools, I think that's great. I think it feels unlikely to me that there's going to be a large scale social grassroots uprising that sort of catapults Bitcoin into the mainstream. I feel like that would have happened after COVID. If it was going to happen, in some ways it did happen because it played a huge role in the election of Donald Trump, right? So there's a lot of evidence to suggest the sort of global grassroots Bitcoin movement was effective, and that era of Bitcoin, it contributed a lot of positive things. I do think this early majority instance of Bitcoin requires a new approach. And yeah, I know a lot of Bitcoiners are not super happy about the Bitcoin Treasuries model. They're not happy with Michael Saylor these days. They don't really maybe understand or like Bitcoin Treasuries or understand what the movement is trying to do. And so with Bitcoin Treasuries, the publication, we're really trying to be the place for that discussion, because that to me feels like the really urgent discussion right now, is that there's a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs who are expressly trying to ensure that Bitcoin becomes part of a Wall Street infrastructure. I think there's a lot of interest in Wall Street too, in participating in that and commercializing Bitcoin, and let's be honest, making money off Bitcoin. That's why Larry Fink was here. And yeah, I think the next 5 to 10 years are primarily going to be driven by this interaction. And look, I love the Bitcoin culture. A lot of my social life is spent in the Bitcoin culture, and I think that the Bitcoin culture is always going to be important. I don't think it's going to go away. So I disagree with the title of that podcast. Is Bitcoin culture dying? I don't think it's going to die. It will always be there. I just don't think it will be the vehicle by which Bitcoin is becoming mainstream. I think that's going to move to the treasury companies and the Wall Street innovators that they're working with, because I think that they're going to create the next kind of wave of products that helps the industry grow. There's always going to be stuff outside of that, right? I have a lot of friends who are upset with the idea that that's possible. I just feel like that's the most likely scenario right now, is that that's how this plays out.
Yeah, and with another bull market, retail enters again, starts to learn more about it. We could see a lot of growth. I do see a lot of that just gravitating to treasuries, derivatives, ETFs, and all that. Some are going to take self-custody. When I was at Prague this past June, it was interesting because it's a very based type of a conference, and there's a lot of talk about Bitcoin is money. Bitcoin needs to be money. Jeff Booth and others will say we really need Bitcoin to be money. And then Saylor gets on stage and is basically saying Bitcoin's capital. And we're all treating it, you all even are largely treating it as a store of value. And that's how it's being held and speculated on and thought about as a store of value. Bitcoin's capital. It can function as money, but you're not really going to use it as money. You're going to use other stuff. There's kind of like your fiat world that's like that you navigate. And then, say you even take self-custody. It's often very much your own capital. And so there's that kind of a divide. You see it playing out in the node debates right now of what is Bitcoin. I'm a Bitcoiner. I will always be a Bitcoiner. So it's not to say that I'm agnostic. I have my personal feelings and beliefs about it, but I also want Bitcoin to be to last the ages, to be decentralized and secure. Whoever uses it, however they use it, I do see it as inevitable. You might judge that, but then it's like, so what are you do you rage quit, or or the vibe is sort of shifting, and people are grappling with that shift in vibe, because that, like you mentioned, the cypherpunk thing, that dream is like still there, but you're not seeing it play out in the capital. And
my view on BIP 110 is it's sort of the last charge of the light brigade of the sort of COVID era Bitcoin culture that wants to sort of get that larger social revolution around Bitcoin. I just think technology is a poor vehicle for social revolutions, right? We saw this with the internet. Like, there's been a lot of social change as a result of the internet, but a lot of us are not. Like, I wouldn't consider myself part of internet culture, and I don't think the internet has a very vibrant culture, right? There was a period in the 90s when the internet had a big cultural presence because it was new and emerging, and you would go to internet cafes and you'd meet your internet friends and you'd have friends on chat rooms. Now the internet is just life, and so I would say, I think there's, for the people in the BIP 110 crowd, I know they've been somewhat anti-BIP 110. I'm still very opposed to it. But I think that a lot of people wanted Bitcoin to change people. This is a very, I need to be very specific with my words here. A lot of people thought that Bitcoin was going to change the thoughts and behaviors of other people. And I think specifically that is not a rational assumption that you should have. Whether your life has been changed by Bitcoin, I think that's fine, and that's great. But I don't think it's necessary for Bitcoin to provide that to everyone, and I don't think it's a reasonable expectation to suggest that really will happen on a large scale. I think a lot of people will use Bitcoin, and they maybe don't have to. Their ideology probably isn't going to change, too much through the use of Bitcoin. In the same way that, look at who uses the internet. The politicians use the internet now. Are they different because they use the internet? Celebrities are on the internet. Are they changed because they're on the internet? Is there something that's different about them spiritually? Not really. People who religious entities have social media accounts. Has social media made them, maybe it spreads their reach in some individual cases, like their pastors, maybe became, viral, or, develops a bit of the social culture, but, there's nothing about them that's really changed. Right. So technology really, I think at scale, it doesn't do this. And so there's a lot of this kind of social revolution in Bitcoin. I see a lot of this in BIP 110. BIP 110 is really about being anti-business, or anti-sailor, or anti-developers. It's a lot of it being against different constituent groups, but for their conduct, right? Sort of the implicit ask is that their conduct needs to conform to some standard, right? And the protocol needs to encourage a certain standard of conduct. And I just think it's a very absurd thing. I don't think that you should want that. If you do want that, I think that maybe you should look for other places outside of Bitcoin to get that. I don't think Bitcoin really, I don't think you need to get that from Bitcoin, or Bitcoin needs to provide that to you. Bitcoin is money. It's $1 that you dropped in the middle of the street. Somebody could pick that up and hand that back to you because they're a nice guy, or they could take it and buy lunch, or they could give it there's 100 outcomes. And I just don't think that Bitcoin should be particularly biased towards any of those things. But yeah, it's an uncomfortable time. I think the early majority is an uncomfortable time. And that's why I would position us in this chart to your question. The early adopters, I think, are clearly kind of going on to more novel and experimental technical projects. There's clearly this mainstream finance wants to be involved in Bitcoin and in cryptocurrency, and they're making big moves. I mean, Morgan Stanley's launching products in the middle of a bear market. I've never seen Wall Street so engaged in the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency story. And so, yeah, I think adoption has changed meaningfully. The other thing with Bitcoin treasuries that I would point out is that our audience is much different than, say, like a Bitcoin Magazine or CoinDesk, which was under 30, low income. Now it's 30 to 60, people with financial experience, people who want to put this as a portfolio, and they're coming with different thoughts and impressions, right? So, yeah, to the radicals and revolutionaries, I mean, obviously I'm sympathetic, right? I find a lot of the things that they want to be really, to be good, right? And I'd actually like to see them champion some of those things. But I don't know if Bitcoin is going to provide them that same level of satisfaction that they got from it earlier. And I would hope that they don't leave Bitcoin because of that. That's really the worry that I see with a lot of these fork efforts.
I was just going to say that. I hate that we would lose good Bitcoiners and good minds in this space that are working on good things if they consider, well, Bankcoin forked off, we're still running Bitcoin. You're either with us or they find something else. And I just hate to lose good people that orange pilled me back in the day and that I still will pay attention to and learn from, but I don't want them to leave what the longest chain is. Because there's that game theory too. And I don't know if you've seen this. I just found this last week, but it's this playing out the game theory, BIP110.orange.surf. There's a simulator and you can just kind of estimate, what the BIP110 hash rate could be. You can put it at the current observed signal, which is, pretty small, or you could estimate out, hey, let's say they had 25% of it, and you can simulate it out and it just, come August 7th or 8th, it plays out what the chain could look like. And I mean, unless something crazy changes here in the next couple of weeks, you can kind of see where that's going. So I don't know. I hate to have people feel just so disenchanted that Bitcoin's no longer Bitcoin, because Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think people like would like, the criticism again. A lot of this happened in Bitcoin Magazine, like as the entity, and I've talked about my experience being there because I think a lot of it happened really quickly because we sort of had to like game theory it out to the end and sort of look at the likely outcomes because it was pretty clear early on that some of these protocols like ordinals like had a pretty large like an audience. It was pretty clear that there was a lot of people using them and that they were coming to Bitcoin specifically to use them. And so then there was a lot of conversation about, okay, like, well, what do what stance or like what evolution should you take? And then I think it was pretty clear, like the scenarios. I think there's a clip going around, the Nuts Van Holm clip of me talking in 2023 about like the difficulties that the BIP 110 crowd would have in forming like a large coalition because their message was sort of explicitly one about excluding certain transactions or people from Bitcoin. And my theory was that they would have a real struggle in making that sort of the specific quote that people really didn't like, but I actually still agree with it, is that I said it, I chose my words very carefully back then, and I think they've stood up. I had a hard time seeing a world where the primary focus of both Bitcoin developers and the culture was specifically to exclude people and to stop them from using Bitcoin. I think that's just like a very hard sell conceptually. And so one of the things that I tried to do was, and this, again, I think there's actually, to use legal jurisprudence, there's like, we've done this before in Bitcoin, which is, you take something that's happened and you say, this is good for Bitcoin and here's why it's good for Bitcoin. And, you run it to the end. I think there was a lot of benefits for crypto people like rage quitting their protocols and going over to Bitcoin. And so a lot of the arguments that I was trying to make back then were like, hey, maybe we can develop a positive argument for this and we can get people to sell their coins and come to Bitcoin, and we can be more, maybe by making this more positive argument for some of these technologies that people don't like, we can get them to feel like this is good for Bitcoin, because there were some effects of that would have arguably, I think, been positive. But yeah, then now the end result is that didn't happen. So you didn't get like the best case scenario, which was like, other protocols shutting down, throwing away their coins and then migrating to Bitcoin. I thought that would have been really, really positive, but it didn't happen. And then and now you sort of see like, well, there's no money, like new money coming in for Bitcoin development really, though obviously that's changed a lot in the last few days. And so, you have this unsolvable problem. The developers like really can't do anything about it and are unwilling to do the things that they're being asked of. And you have this kind of loud, angry minority that just increasingly can't really be satisfied. Like their own technical proposal doesn't solve the problems that they are putting forward. And they're still mad about it, and they want someone to do something about it. But the thing about Bitcoin is that there is no one to do anything about anything because it's an anarchist system.
It's just running, right?
So there's nobody. So yeah, I feel like a lot of like really what happened is that a lot of the people who were in Bitcoin because came through like the political outrage of COVID. They're sort of used to being upset about like the failure of democratic institutions or just like institutions in general. And so then you make the argument, well, is Bitcoin Core like an authority, like an institutional authority, and has there been a failure? Like, and so I think people are they're looking at Bitcoin Core and they're like, this is like Harvard that became woke. And it's like, well, there's no, it's not like Bitcoin Core is not a constituent group. They publish a software. You clearly don't have to use it because if you're running knots, you're not using it. So you don't have to actually use what they publish. And they're subject to the same rules as everybody else is, and they're also not asking to change any of the rules, right? They're not. They may change certain aspects of how their software functions,
policies,
but they can't actually change the rules of the network,
right?
And so the only alternative then was that you would have had to gone down the road of like there being consensus changes to stop these activities or to try to prevent them. And I don't know. Look, I'm good friends with a lot of people who started that movement, and I think, if you were to offer like, and I've tried to game this out, which is like, what's the best case? Would have been the best case for BIP 110? Sure. It's like, you could have created a culture of people who wanted to proactively stop spam. And then sure, maybe someone just invented something that worked. But as long as it was just sort of knots, like, and you were staying with a consensus, it made a lot of sense. The moment that you're like, BIP110 is I mean, they're going to end up on another chain with a minority fork. And I think the reality for them is that they will be like a Bitcoin Cash type chain that like just doesn't have a lot of economic power. And that would be even like one of the better scenarios for them, is that they actually are able to fork off and form another chain. It's not actually clear to me that they'll have enough economic power to actually create their own chain. That gets into like a whole other set of game theory. Because the one thing about, I don't know, that chart that you sent, there's some additional game theory because Coinbase rewards pay out after 100 blocks. So your coins are basically frozen. So the new chain essentially would need at least 100 blocks for you to get paid anything.
Gotcha.
So, the new chain has to go at least 100 blocks. And with Bitcoin Cash, when Bitcoin Cash split, people may not know this, or may not know, sort of what happened back then. But the miners who were involved in starting the Bitcoin Cash chain, they basically had to mine a separate chain for a full day and a half at like full speed, like not getting any payment for like all their hashing. And then after like 36 hours, they created a block, and then they were able to build the chain off of that. But it took there was a big economic expense. It's like hugely costly to create a fork if there's serious economic weight behind it. And so again, I think it'll be interesting to see like who's willing to bear this cost for this cause. And I don't know. I don't know what I can do for the folks in that set. I think they might have to learn a hard lesson, and I hope that they come back to Bitcoin. There's been a lot of folks from the Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV eras that have come back to Bitcoin recently, including folks that I used to know from back in the day. And it sucks. I mean, it's terrible to like talk to some of these people who had a lot of Bitcoin and now they have nothing and they have to start again, and they feel really bad about their family, has a lot of judgment against them. I mean, I know people who went through that. They were in part of a social group that encouraged them to basically sell their Bitcoin and buy Bitcoin Cash, and they didn't enjoy the benefits of the Bitcoin network growing and developing, right?
Yeah, and I have my personal ethics around money and Bitcoin. I'm also a free market guy and understand fairly well kind of the operations and the game theory of Bitcoin as it is. And I think what was it? Ayn Rand said, you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. And I just hope that doesn't hit people like, what? I thought, I was told, I heard, I feel that this was going to happen. And now, I hope there's not an existential crisis people hit. Not to belabor all that, because it's just, I don't want to say I'm looking forward to it. I just never I never lived through the block wars. I know this is different, but there's never been such a sort of a split scenario that I've ever witnessed. Yeah. So I'm
as a historian, I'm obviously fascinated. It'll be the first time that it will actually be the first time that a soft fork is activated by a UASF in 2017. That actually never happened, so we don't really know what will happen. So it'll be a first. I would say what I hope is that they don't get the economic success to form a minority chain, and they have to kind of regroup, but don't have a huge financial loss as a result of it. But I don't know. I've said this to other folks in the industry as kind of a joke, but it's BIP110 is a technical solution to people's emotional problems, and I actually really believe that there's a certain amount of things that in life, like technology, can't solve for you. And if you're in Bitcoin because you don't like other people or you want to keep certain people out of Bitcoin, I don't know, the Chris Guida and Bitcoin Mechanic, the idea that Bitcoin is secured by great men and the greatness of men, I understand why in a democracy there's a validity in that idealism, right? And in a sense, a democracy can be secured by that because it is a majoritarian voting based system. The idea that Bitcoin is secured by the specific benevolence of people is problematic because it's not a governed institution. Like, so it
Right.
isn't governed. There's
Like
no
Bitcoin
governance
growing
of.
because smart developers, smart men are building Bitcoin, and Bitcoin grows because people are building Bitcoin. And it might mark the shift between the first stage of Bitcoin and the second, where it's not the cypherpunks and just the developers anymore. It's now this wealth capital movement that's deciding some things now.
Yeah, there's a great early blog post I've been going back to a lot recently. I've been sending this into some chats. It's if you've never been there, it was a blog called Trilemma. It was written by a man who's now deceased, Mirsha Popescu, who's probably one of the greatest thinkers in Bitcoin history. But it's called Bitcoin and the Poor, and it was written in reaction to Luke Dasher, actually, and it talks a lot about how there is no Bitcoin community. There can't be a Bitcoin community because the relationship between the protocol and the individual is such as that it's a one-to-one relationship. That's what sovereignty is, right? Is that you have a direct relationship with the technology. There's no, you don't intermediate through some larger collective. And so that the idea that Bitcoin has governance, needs governance, or needs to sort of adapt through changes to the protocol is sort of based in this idea on some level that it is collectivism. I know a lot of the Bitcoin 110 folks don't like to hear this, but I think they need to hear it. What they're actually arguing for is that, and I don't think this is true with knots, right? I actually like knots is actually, I think, a celebration of the individual and the protocol, because, it shows that you, like in this case, Luke Dasher, the single aggrieved party, can author something that is compatible with Bitcoin and then stay within the consensus, even though you object to some of the rules. Like, that's actually a very beautiful thing, because you, the lone individual, can take action against the collective if you think the collective has wronged you, yet you still enjoy the economic power of the collective through holding Bitcoin. That's a very beautiful and great thing, and I think that alternative implementations to Bitcoin are broadly pretty good.
Yeah.
Where that kind of sours for me is that this idea that, well, you are requiring some people who don't agree with you to actually to be submissive to you, to bend to your will, right? You're basically saying, we are not allowing this activity, right? So it is a collective telling the individual that, like, your activity is now disallowed, and so therefore it is an act of majoritarianism or collectivism, and it does resemble these things that look more like democracy rather than an individual interfacing with the protocol. And I'll give you another counterexample, which, like, Casey Rodarmore writing ordinals is an individual sovereign expression, like, of the protocol. It's like he wrote a protocol. The protocol interacts with Bitcoin. Other people can voluntarily and freely associate and partake in those transactions. My kid's pretty upset, but they can participate in those transactions. And then you, like the other individual, within Bitcoin, doesn't have to be a part of that collective. And, sure, you bear the cost of the other people's, activity, but you're not, you don't really have to participate. You can prune your node and run it in different ways to ignore them. And so, I think that's really lost in a lot of the discussions around BIP 110, is that it's trying to frame itself somewhat inauthentically, when really in reality what they're suggesting is that, I think their version of Bitcoin is one where the individual has less freedoms and less power and less choice. And in a sense, like, a lot of their arguments resemble sort of the COVID era arguments of, well, you don't have rights, you have privileges. You have to stay in your home because we, the collective, think it's too dangerous for you to leave. So it's similar to them saying, like, oh, well, you, the ordinals person, like, you have to stay at home because, like, you're too dangerous. We're going to fork you out because you're wrong. Right. You know what I mean? And so there's this power dynamic that's different, and it's just objectively different, because you can describe it in these different scenarios and make it pretty clear that, like, it's not, the protocol doesn't change and the individual doesn't change. So in a world where someone who is doing an ordinal transaction is running the ord software and then compiling a transaction, deploying it to Bitcoin, and that transaction is invalid, well, like, who made it invalid? It has to be some group of people that did that. And I think a Bitcoin where any group of people are in charge, like, is a bad thing, whether it's the developers or however enlightened. And I think this is why the BIP 110 people, like, they don't really want to identify themselves as a collective. And then instead they fall back on this idea of like the great men, right? Well, we will be moral and great men. But yeah, it's like, well, not really. It's like you're taking an active action collectively against other individuals who like maybe they infringed you, I guess. But it seems like there are some things you can do to remedy that if you're particularly infringed. And so I don't know. Yeah, it's a really tough scenario. A lot of this is really dense. Like, I don't know how much of it. It's been hard to like
For
even
me,
talk about it.
and I might have lost. For me, it's a lot about not just what happens on August 7th or August 8th with a fork, but the social aftermath from that and how people handle everything about it in the month or months afterwards, and where the social layer goes, I guess. So now just to be respectful of your time and to move forward here, I don't want to neglect the conference coming up with this is the second one, right? Bitcoin Treasuries Conference in New York City, September 28th. Tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah, we think it's going to be a big one. We think that, as I said, I've laid out some of my thesis here. The institutional movement around Bitcoin, I think, needs narrative support. I think they need to have meetings where they can set their narrative and display their narrative. And yeah, this is going to be a much different event if you're used to going to Bitcoin or crypto events. We don't expect there to be a cultural presence or an entrepreneurial, or sort of a grassroots kind of activist presence. Like the Bitcoin Treasuries Conference is really for folks who want to do business on Wall Street and want to help, onboard Wall Street to Bitcoin and want to advance some of these ideas that Michael Saylor has put forward. You've seen the headliners: Adam Back, Grant Cardone, Eric Weiss. We've got a lot more speakers coming in, including some folks that Bitcoiners will know. But yeah, it's really about maybe this relates back to the BIP 110 conversation, right? I think it's okay for the people who are interested in institutional Bitcoin to have their own space, right? I don't necessarily know that every conference, that is a Bitcoin conference has to sort of be a Bitcoin everything conference. So this conference is really just about institutional Bitcoin and what's going on at that nexus. Same thing with Bitcoin Treasuries. And if you want to check it out, obviously you can go to bitcointreasuries.net/conference and get your ticket. It is going to be a specific conversation about what's happening there. But obviously, I think we need a lot of intellectual support and folks to get on board and designing these new products. I mean, people forget STRC, SATA, some of these more novel Bitcoin products that Saylor launched. I mean, these are less than a year old. This is cutting edge.
It's awesome. Super exciting. So let's see. Discussions. And so I'm curious to see what the conversations are about, where things are going. I want to point out that Bitcoin Treasuries has a podcast themselves on YouTube. You can find on YouTube Bitcoin Treasuries Net, a lot of hot takes and regular content there. Your podcast, now this is, as long as you've been in the space, I've always and you've been on so many podcasts and on the news desk rooms and out there everywhere, prolifically writing. This is a relatively new podcast for you, right?
Yeah. If you go to the latest one, you'll see some ones with some better thumbnails. I got a little better at making thumbnails as time went on. But look, it's a new podcast. I know a lot of folks in the industry and, talk a lot with them. We've had some big names: Lynn Alden, Samson Mao. Got some big ones coming up, talking to Prince Philip over from Jan 3 next week, as well as some big folks upcoming. But look, I mean, it's more for general Bitcoin conversation. As I said, I think I'm trying to come to terms with, you mentioned the migration of Bitcoin treasuries, right? Where can I help the early majority? It's pretty clear. I've spent my career building different content platforms. I think there's a lot of energy around the folks who want to onboard Wall Street to Bitcoin. I'm probably not the best person to lead that myself as a content creator, because I'm, I'm not a CFA. I don't have an MBA. I'm not someone who's, classically schooled in finance. So if you ask me about the specific capital structures behind STRC or SATA, you're not going to find that I have too many opinions, right? So for me, it was really, I wanted to create a space to continue talking about Bitcoin and Bitcoin technology, Bitcoin culture, while acknowledging, I think, that there's a lot of great young creators who are coming out, writing and publishing, creating videos and doing interviews around the institutional side. And so there I'm a bit more of a mentor, right? I'm helping them kind of create the branding, create the design, figure out how to scale and build their messaging, rather than an active participant where, I'm militantly involved in, trading Bitcoin treasury products all the time, right? For me, it's more about, it's pretty clear there's a large audience, like new audience, that wants to hear what these folks has to say. And there's a lot of young content creators, who maybe don't have the skill set that I have, for having done it for so long. And so, folks like Tyler Rowe, Miller Cole, Tim Kotzman, more well-known names in the Bitcoin treasury space. I spent a lot of time, with them, helping them develop their messaging, getting better. And, we all try to do our best for Bitcoin, right? And,
and you're such a conduit for the information. Let alone your news feed, your day by day, the information coming out, your newsletter. Now with the podcast, it's just another facet of channeling information and reach for people to find it. And getting the guests on is so important. You've had some amazing, great guests on. A viewer here, Plastic, says he just got subscribed. So, hey,
appreciate it.
I will. So there's on YouTube at Bitcoin History. You can find the Bitcoin historian here. Pete Rizzo is on YouTube there. And your, let's see, no, this is your website here, PeteRizzo.com, a lot of info there. Your newsletter, Bitcoin History Newsletter, BitcoinHistoryNewsletter.com. You can subscribe here for free to your newsletter, weekly newsletter, and not miss anything. So I want to point people to that as well.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate the chance to chat with you and offer my perspective. And I hope folks will check it out. And I hope you'll stay within Bitcoin consensus. I think it's going to be a tough August for folks, but
stick with Bitcoin, folks. Find Pete.
We'll get through it. Yeah.
On X at Pete_Rizzo_. Pete, this has been great. Really appreciate the time you've lent me. I'm going to let you get back to your family. I have family and a fiat job as well, but I really enjoyed the conversation. We'll see what happens in August, and we'll see what happens in September at the conference. So doing a lot of great things. I love it.
Appreciate it, sir. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, man. Bye, everybody.